Well, good morning. How are you today? A good day. The rain is gone. The light has come. So I want to share with you a few kids' answers to some really, really important tests. So Bob has 36 candy bars. He ate 29. What does Bob have now? Diabetes. Bob has diabetes. What are the three things you want to do in the future? Get a girlfriend, kiss her, rule the world. Imagine that you lived at the same time of Abraham Lincoln. What would you say to him or ask him? I'd tell him to never go to a play. Briefly explain what hard water is. Briefly enough, right? Ice. Marcus is the strongest kid in second grade. He used to lift 12 pounds. Now he can lift 97. How much more can he lift? Marcus is on steroids. Brainstorm. This is awesome, right? Complete the sentences below with action verbs. I like to move it, move it. I like to move it, move it. I like to move it, move it. I like to move it. There we go, yes. Name these 2D shapes. Jude, Charlotte, Charlie, Sophia, Harriet, Emily, and Maria. Nice. Suggest one cause of deforestation. This paper. Yeah. Saturn, Uranus, Neptune have at least three things in common. They are all planets, they're all round, none of them have McDonald's. Short answer. Provide an example of risk. No. Alice places a prepared slide on her microscope. When she looks into it, she cannot see anything. Suggest one reason why not. She's blind. There are 26 kids at the beach. 37 more kids come. How many kids are at the beach now? Too many for COVID-19. Who's your hero? Dad. Why is he considered this person your hero? He's a brave. Anything your hero is frightened of? Mom. Write a question using why. Change centimeters to meters. Take out centi. Write 5 words you can spell. 5. Not perfect. Yes. Motivate your answer. Go answer, go. Right? Defend your answer. Sarge, I don't know how much longer we can hold him. Now, this is brilliant. It's a true-false test. Everyone can be true or false. Like, who thinks of that? Right? Oh, man, he got every one of those wrong, by the way. And he could defend his answers, I'm sure. So we have these tests in life that all of us face. Not all of them have quite as funny of an answer. So for me, one of the biggest tests I faced was graduating from college and then kind of deciding what comes next. For a while, I thought it was going to be graduate school, and I started MFT program at Harding and hated it and didn't think I could do counseling every day of my life, and so I got out of that and started looking for a job in ministry, and the response I kept getting from every single church that I sent an application to is, I'm sorry, you're too young and you're not married, because everyone in ministry wants someone who's 35 and has 2 kids. And so every church I had sent a message to or a resume to had said, no, we're not going to even interview you. And finally, one day, I got a call from a friend who had sent my resume to a church in Cleburne, Texas. And growing up in Garland, I had actually never heard of Cleburne, Texas, even though it was only about an hour away. And so I said, oh, that'll be great. And they called, and we did this phone interview, and everything went really, really well. He said, we want you to come down and interview with us. And so I went down and I spent the morning with the kids, went to worship, had lunch with the kids and parents, met with the shepherds there, and thought things went really well. And I turned and headed back to Garland, and I got about halfway back home, and they called and said, hey, turn around and come back. So I ended up going back to Cleburne that day, and I spent the rest of the afternoon and evening with them. And I was driving back to Garland, and right as I was getting home, it's been a long, long day, I figured I needed to treat myself to ice cream. And so I pulled into Brahms right off 635 by our house, and I got a phone call from Cleburne. And they said, we want to offer you a job. And they actually had 2 people scheduled for the next 2 weekends that they called and canceled. I was like, this is amazing. God's working in this. And it seemed like it took forever. But the wait really wasn't that long. And when I got to Cleburne, I found out that in the church I was at, and really in Cleburne, that single people didn't stay. And so I was kind of, am I ever going to get married? Or am I ever going to meet anyone? God imported from the nation to our north, Oklahoma, a lovely young woman named Cammie, and we met and got married, and we have 4 beautiful kids. And it's amazing how these tests that we go through, where we're questioning and we're thinking to ourselves, I just don't see how this can work out. I don't know in my mind how things are going to make sense. And so many times our tendency, when we don't see the way we want to see, our tendency is to bail. We want out of this situation because it's hard or because it's difficult or it's uncomfortable. We want to do anything we can to change it. And sometimes the beauty is in the difficulty. Sometimes the most powerful, memorable, life-changing moments come in the most difficult times that more than anything else we want to get out of. Because it's in those moments that God becomes so close to us. Because we're searching for answers anywhere we can find them. And those tests are so often opportunities, but they can also be traps. Because God has called us to follow Him, to love Him. He's invited us into this world to represent Him. And you and I get to choose. We get to choose if we're going to follow and allow the tree of life to be the source of our life, or that tree of knowledge, what we see and what we think and what we know, to guide our steps. And when we are tested, I think the greatest question we can ask is, does the tester have my best interest at heart? When I am tested, is it the life giver? Is it the Creator that is giving me this test to transform me, to change me? Or is it the deceiver who is trying to lead me astray? We're going to talk about, as you probably guessed from a lot of the songs this morning, a guy named Moses. And Moses, just like Noah, was saved in an ark. He lived at a time when the Israelites were growing in number, and Pharaoh wanted to get rid of them, and he issues this decree that all of the Hebrew babies be thrown into the Nile. His mom takes a basket, places him in the basket, and sets him in the water. And it's through the water that he comes into this new world. Right? Sounds really familiar to the story of Noah, right? It's this test. And God provides for Moses. He takes care of him. And he finds himself in Pharaoh's house, growing up, cared for, living life differently than all of the Hebrew brothers and sisters of his that are slaves in Egypt. And God has a plan for Moses. But Moses is at a point in his life, he's not ready for God's plan. He's still trying to do things his own way, the ways that look right to him. And so one day, he sees an Egyptian beating up one of his fellow Hebrews, and he steps in. And he starts to play the judge and the jury and the executioner, and he kills the Egyptian. He's found out. And Moses flees into the desert of Midian for 40 years. For 40 years, he is on the backside of the desert tending sheep of his father-in-law. And one day, as he is tending sheep, it says he was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. And when the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. And then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. So you have this imagery of a tree or a bush that's on fire. And Moses walks up to it because he hears a voice coming from this bush. And this bush is offering him life if he is willing to listen to it. If he is willing to hear the words of God. Because God is choosing him. He's choosing him to be the leader of his people that rescue the people from slavery in Egypt. And so God says to him, Go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Moses' question is, Who am I that you would invite me to do this? Remember, just a little bit later in the story, God is going to tell Moses who he is. And his answer is, I am. So this bush comes on the scene, it's on fire, and it's not burning up. And God speaks out of the bush to Moses. And Moses says, Who am I? And God's response is not, You are Moses, you are my chosen one. His response is, I am. And in this moment, Moses has a choice. He has a test. Will he listen to the voice of God? Or will he listen to what he sees? Will he listen to what he knows? Will he listen to what looks right to him? And it's a test. Will Moses trust God to lead him and protect him? Because the first test he faced with the Egyptian, he went with what he saw. And what he did is he killed the Egyptian because that looked right to him. But what looked right to him led him to 40 years of exile in the desert. And if you were to ask Moses, why did you do that? Because that's what I thought needed to be done. But what he thought led him to a very dry and desolate place. What he thought didn't work out the way he thought it would. And so Moses is on the backside of the desert with these sheep. One of my favorite rabbinic commentaries talks about this burning bush. And the rabbis say the beauty of this story is that the bush was on fire with the glory of God the entire time Moses was in the wilderness. For 40 years, that bush was on fire, ablaze with the glory of God. But it took Moses 40 years in the desert to realize it, to hear God's voice, to see God's glory right there in front of him. Is it possible? Is it possible you and I miss the glory of God every single day? That he is all around us. That he fills every single burning bush in this room with his glory. Yet so many times we aren't alert enough to his presence that we recognize it and that we see it. You see, I think Moses is probably content with just finishing his days shepherding actual sheep. But God was calling him to something bigger, beyond anything he could see or imagine. And Moses was reluctant to go. And I think he trusts God. I think that's why he enters into the conversation. I think that's why he argues. But he also knows that God is not the only one that's going to test him. Pharaoh is going to test him as well. And he's going to have an answer to Pharaoh's tests. But listen to what God says as he calms his nerves. Now go, I will help you, and I will teach you what to say. If you will allow me to be the source of life, I will take care of you, and I will be the answer, and I will be your voice if you will only seek me out. But Moses says, pardon me. Send someone else. Because I don't know how I can do it. And that's the beauty of the story. Moses responds, I don't know. I don't know how this works. It doesn't make sense here. And God's invitation is, Moses, it doesn't have to make sense here to you. See, that the test, I think Moses is thinking, well, the test is how well I'm going to do. But the test is not how well he does. The test is, will he go? Will you trust me enough? Will you honor me enough as holy to be obedient, to go where I call you? And when things don't make sense, and when everything doesn't look the way you think it should look, that you would stop seeking yourself and your knowledge and plant yourself in me. And if you will allow me to be the answer to every question, you will find life. And it comes back to that, who has your best interest at heart? Is it the one who created you? Is it the one who called you? Or is there another voice in your life that says you're not good enough? That you're not smart enough? That it doesn't look right, you should probably abandon the plan? What voice will you listen to? The liar or the creator? The deceiver or the life giver? And reluctantly, Moses listens and goes as God calls him. And he ends up leading the people out of Egypt, through the Red Sea, toward the Promised Land. And once they arrive in the other side of the Red Sea, once they arrive out of Egypt, they encounter another problem. And it brings this question back to the forefront of our mind. Will Moses trust God to provide for him and the people? Or again, is it going to be what we see? Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went into the desert of Shur. For 3 days they traveled in the desert without finding water. Then they came to Marah. They could not drink its water because it was bitter. That is why the place is called Marah, or Mara. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What are we to drink?" Right? If you remember back last week, Abraham arrives in Canaan, and there's a famine. He arrives in the place that God called him, and there's a famine, and things don't look right, and he leaves. And he finds himself in trouble in Egypt. Now, outside of Egypt, they encounter another problem. There's no water. And the people grumble, and the question is, what will Moses do? Will he trust God and allow God to be the source of the answer? Or will he formulate his own plan? Will he listen to the people and go back? Is it the tree of life or the tree of knowledge? And then Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became fit to drink. There the Lord issued a ruling and instruction for them and put them to the test. He provides for them from a tree, and then he's going to test them. He provides for them, and now he's going to test them. And God is going to use a piece of wood to provide. Why? Because he cried out to God. He didn't have the answer to the problem. And in that moment, he goes to God and asks him for the answer. And he provides from a piece of wood. And then he tests them. He said, if you listen carefully to the Lord your God and do what is right in His eyes, if you pay attention to His commands and keep all His decrees, I will not bring on you any of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. He gives them this test. Will you trust me enough to be obedient to what I tell you? Because if you will follow me and if you will listen to me, then I will bless you. If you will listen, then I will bless you. And I think so often we mix up this if-then paradigm. Because our response is not, God, we're going to do whatever you have said. It's, God, here's how I see it working. And if you will do this, then I will be obedient. Then I will follow. But God offers life to Moses and the people, if only they will follow. And Moses, this pastor, this shepherd of the people, goes back up on a mountain. And there he's going to meet with God. And God is going to tell them the exact same thing. If you will be obedient and if you will follow, then you are going to be a blessing to this world. You are going to be my priests and my representatives. The world will know what God is like because of you. If you will allow me to be the source of life. If you will allow me to sustain you, if you will allow me to give you the answers, if you will go through difficulty and you will seek me out, then I will take care of you. Because God's commands were never meant to be a burden. And I think so often we think of them as burdensome. Oh, we can't do that, or we can't. But what if the Creator, the sustainer of life says, I have something amazing planned for your life, and I'm going to take care of you, and you're going to bless this world if you will only listen to me. You see, I'm trying to be your source of life to form you and to shape you into my image. But so often we get sidetracked because it doesn't look like we think it should look. And the answers don't add up the way we think the answers should add up. And so Moses goes to meet with God. And the people have committed, yes, we're in. We're going to do everything God has said. And so the question, with Aaron now in charge, will Aaron and Israel trust the faithfulness of God too? Will they be obedient? So Exodus 32. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt." Now listen to this. "We do not know what has happened to him." We don't know. And I think God would say, you don't have to know how everything is going to turn out. You don't have to know the answer to every question before you take the next step of faith. All you have to do is listen to my voice. They wanted knowledge to be their source of life. And Aaron abandons them as pastor and shepherd and becomes an accomplice. Aaron answered them, "Take off your gold earrings that your wives, your sons, your daughters are wearing and bring them to me." So all the people took off their earrings. They brought them to Aaron. They gave them to Aaron. He took them, what they handed to him, made them into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. And then they said, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." When Aaron saw, right, are you catching garden language? He gave, he took, he saw, right? We're supposed to be thinking back to this original test in the garden. Because the garden, it happens every single day, all over again. Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord. So the next day the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. Afterwards, they sat down to eat and drink, and got up to indulge in revelry. The people decided that the tree of life, as their source of life, was not good enough. And so they created their own tree. They created this golden calf that they could worship and that they could follow because they needed to know. They needed to know what comes next. And God is furious with the people. And this test is, Moses, will you remain faithful to your calling even when everyone else is not? And says the next day, Moses said to the people, "You have committed a great sin. But now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin." So Moses went back to the Lord and said, "Oh, what great sin these people have committed. They have made themselves gods of gold. But now, please forgive their sin. But if not, then blot me out of the book you have written." Is that not powerful? Abraham sacrifices his son. Moses, as the leader of the people, is willing to sacrifice his life. He's willing to lay down his life for the people. What a test of faith. Have you ever been through a test of faith? A time that really tried you? A time that you questioned? A time that you wondered? Because so many times in those moments, we feel lost, we're hurting, we're angry, we're alone, we're afraid, we're uncertain, we're hopeless. And we want so badly for things to make sense so that we know what happens next. But the problem is so often we seek ourself to be the answer. rather than searching and crying out to God to be the answer. See, in Moses spends the rest of his life leading the people. And God calls him, and with frustration he does. And God asks him to speak to a rock, to bring water out, and instead he strikes it. And I want you to listen to what happens next. This is in Numbers. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land that I give them." And after leading Israel his entire life, Moses is going to die on the side of a mountain that overlooks the promised land. And if there is anything in the Bible, like, I know life is not fair, I know life is not supposed to be fair, but that is not fair. That is not fair. To get that close and not get to enter. But I noticed something when I was reading. Actually, I noticed it several years ago when we were in COVID. God does not give up on Moses. God does not abandon Moses. And God is still going to use Moses to lead Israel. And Moses never complains. He never says, that doesn't look right, that's not right, this is not fair. And I think the answer, I think the reason, is Moses had found something better than the promised land. The presence of God. Because for years, he allowed God to be the source of life as he led the people. And there is an intimacy that comes with walking that closely with him that you cannot explain. I don't know what life has for you right now. But I know, or I would assume, your tendency is like mine. That we want to make it up for ourselves as we go. And we want to be the source of every answer to every question that we have. But God's invitation is to follow him, to search for him, and in him find life. Father, we thank you so much for this day. God, for the greatness of your presence in this place. Father, for your glory shown through every single person here. Father, may we realize the beauty of your presence with us. And Father, may we find in you the answer to every question and every test that we are facing. May we find in you the source of life. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.